Well, y'all are little thing. Oh, hey y'all. Hey guys, welcome back to Night Shift with Andrea Up Late. It is Tuesday, September 12th. So we've had quite a few things going on these past few days. I'm excited for tonight's show. We're going to be talking about the case of it's a missing unsolved case from back in 1995. We're going to talk about Heather Teague. This to me is an incredibly interesting case. It can be broken up into many, many parts. I know I say that often. This one, though, you do find rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole. So to talk to me tonight about this case, we have dear friends of mine, Beth and Greg from the, the Bar is Open with Beth and Greg podcast. So let's go on and get them on. And they are going to hang out with us tonight.
Hey, hello.
Hey, well, thank you guys so much for having us on. Thank you so much.
Hey, absolutely. I think that I was thinking earlier, I've been on y'all's show now, maybe twice, I think.
Twice,
and
yep.
So I'm really pumped to have y'all here on this side of things in the Night Shift corner.
Should be fun. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm every time you come on, or each time you've come on, you've brought a wild case to talk through. So I can't even imagine what we're going to talk about tonight. So super excited.
Yeah, this one's wild in the sense that it's not gruesome or salacious or crazy like the one we talked about last time on your show. It's interesting though because we start at every turn I actually try to be objective and try to push away from the idea of a conspiracy just to see, be a skeptic in that sense, try to not make it a conspiracy, not make it a cover up or whatever. In so many of these cases, especially these unsolved from the 80s and 90s, it's just interesting when you get into some of these kind of smaller departments and more rural areas, but we'll see. This one has some twists and turns. Like I said, it's unsolved, and there are some people in they have very strong opinions in very different camps on what might have happened here. So yeah, let's
I can't wait to hear it.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
So you guys, if you are listeners to Night Shift, usually what happens is I will go on and break down a case. We will talk about something. It tends to usually be more unsolved stuff, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's something case closed, but it's worth talking about. Like last week, we talked about the Bever murders, also known as the Broken Arrow killings. If you haven't listened to that one, I urge you to, but with discretion. That one's tough. It was one of the tougher ones to get through talking about. But there was a whole reason why I thought it was important to talk about it. And we talked about that toward the end of the episode there. This one is unsolved, and we are going to check in on it. All right, guys. So we're going to take it back to 1990.
Is it perfect? Nope. Let's go.
Cool. Sorry. We're going to take it back to 1995. Again, I told you we're going to be talking about Heather Teague. Got a lot of handwritten little grandmother notes on this one. So you'll hear me crunching this paper pretty often, all right? So Heather was born on April 25th of 1972. She grew up in Kentucky. She had long brown hair, green eyes. She was extremely petite. She was just at around 5'2", and she weighed between 90 and 100 pounds. So teeny tiny little thing. Mm-hmm. She was 23 at the time of this case. So those were kind of her height and weight at that time at 23 years old. She did have scoliosis, so she had a pretty defined curved back there. It was kind of starting to get worse as she was getting older. At this time, like I said, she lived in Kentucky. She was specifically in Henderson County, Kentucky. And in 1995, Henderson County had right at about 44,000 people in terms of population. Henderson County, Kentucky is located on like the northwest area of Kentucky, and it's separated by the river from Indiana from there. So that's kind of the area where she was at this time. Excuse me. Heather was a bright girl. She was known to have a lot of friends. She was a cheerleader for a short time, did really well in high school, really good grades, really outgoing, as I feel like we talk about in a lot of these cases. And like I said, a lot of friends. So she did go on to college, had thoughts of potentially becoming even a doctor, kind of some big aspirations. But things got a little sideways for Heather. We're not exactly sure what really happened, but she did go on and drop out and move back home with mom not too long after starting college. So she's back home with her mother, whose name's Sarah. I'll reference Sarah a lot because if you start to read into this case, or if you already have ever looked into this case, a lot of people have. This one is not unknown necessarily, but Sarah Teague, her mother, is continues to be, we're now pushing 3 decades later, a huge advocate for her daughter. And so you will hear her in different interviews and things like that. So at this time, Heather's moved back home with mom. She starts to dabble in drugs. So reports are that her behavior around this time in late summer of 95 was becoming occasionally erratic. She just kind of wasn't herself. Her mom will talk about her having some moments of just being angry. In fact, it's pretty pitiful, but one of mom's, kind of teary interviews and talking about this is just the night before, how Sarah had left the house kind of in a huff. She's unhappy. And, her mom said, why are you, what's the matter? Why are you so angry? And Heather said, I wish I knew why I was so angry, and she left. I think that was the last time they actually spoke. But on this day, this is going to be the afternoon of August 26th of 1995. So Sarah took her things, her beach chair, her bathing suit, and she goes to this place called Newburgh Beach there in Henderson County. So you guys, if you're not familiar, a lot of times like landlocked states will have, lakes, or like I said, here we have the Ohio River. And so there will often be what people refer to as beaches. And so dirt or sandy area that leads up to the water, and people kind of utilize it as such. So they'll put their chairs out, take picnics, towels, etc., hang out in the water there. So that's what she's done. I will say later on, though, when you hear from her mother, she didn't even know this place existed. And now this was a populated kind of area for people to go hang out. So it wasn't like it was just this unknown place, but mom didn't really know it existed, definitely didn't know would be hanging out there. So there are a few things, and she was a young adult. I mean, so it makes sense that she's doing things or going places that mom doesn't necessarily know about. But I thought that was kind of interesting when I found that out. And you guys, Beth and Greg, I haven't said anything too riveting just yet, but if you ever have any questions or whatever, just interrupt, just yell over.
And that's why I'm trying to let you set the stage, of course, right?
I'm just taking notes right now, so I remember.
We're copious note takers.
Guys, they said they came with notes, so this is a professional organization.
I wouldn't go that far, but
Same as I crinkle my legal pad here. All right, so we have across the Ohio River. Let me see as I'm talking to you. I'm not sure if I pulled a picture of that or not. If not, as always, I will have these photos on the Andrea Up Late Instagram page. A few of you have asked about having posts and photos on YouTube, and I would love to. Because you have to have a certain number of subscribers. So while the podcast Night Shift is not new, my personal YouTube page is. So until that grows a little bit, I won't be able to post pics and things like that. But once I do, that'll help all of you that don't have social media. I know a lot of you reach out saying that you don't. So as soon as I'm able, I will put those pics up there. Let me see. I'm not sure I have a photo of it. Either way, if you can imagine, it's the say what? Share the show.
Share the show.
If you can imagine, exactly. It's the Ohio River. So we're not talking about a little creek basin here. So when I say across the bank from her, like to the other bank, this is a very large area. So across the bank there, which actually then turns into Evansville, Indiana. So now we're not only in a different jurisdiction, we're out of state lines. So keep that in mind when we talk about the upcoming investigation and things like that, because that does matter for some reasons. So across the Ohio River, a man named Tim Walthall. Tim Walthall, I believe, was in his 50s. I've seen the guy. I don't know his age, but let's say 50s maybe. He was at home with his wife, and they were about to have lunch. Like I said, it's around 12:45 p.m. on the 26th of August. So he's looking out his window with a telescope. So he has a telescope that his wife and he say that he looks out the window often, which for all intents and purposes, I think that's not crazy. He's got the water view, right? And all this kinds of thing. He said that he was a bird watcher. I won't get in the weeds with this, but there are a handful of people who will say that actually he was just kind of a creep. He was a peeping Tom.
That's kind of where I was going. Where my
I went bird watcher. So I was like,
bird watcher.
I thought, I mean, he's there with his wife. They're having lunch. Yeah.
Or across the river.
Yeah. I know.
You know, I mean,
it's true.
It's not illegal, I guess.
It's not until it escalates. Either way, I will give you a spoiler alert. Tim is not implicated here. I mean, there are some people who always think some things, but he eventually is not implicated in any kind of crime or abduction of Heather. But just, leave it for what it is. He was either watching birds or watching girls. So, So he is looking out that window, about to eat his sandwich, and he sees the area of beach that Heather is on. So she's situated herself, the way he describes it, a bit away from the other beachgoers. So she wasn't completely isolated. People were around, but she'd kind of set up her camp, quite a few dozen feet away from anyone else. So she was kind of alone in her immediate vicinity there. So she was lying there on her lounge chair. She had her bathing suit top unclasped, which is not uncommon to avoid tan lines. And at this time, Tim saw something that he has said seared into his memory that he will never, ever forget. Tim watched as a man comes out of the wood line. So if you can picture that beach area, there is a kind of a thicket of a heavy wood line that runs all along down that beach. So he sees a man coming out of the wood line. His initial call, the initial time he calls, he says that this man was walking very slowly up behind Heather. All right. Okay. His story changes occasionally. So at the beginning, though, he says this man is walking very slowly up toward Heather. He says that he leans down, and before Heather can even register that this man is there, he wraps like a handful of her hair around his fist and gets her up off the chair, like yanks her up off of her lounge chair. He said at this time he saw a glint of something silver. He's later said it was a revolver. He said it was a gun. Not sure what kind of hubble he had that he was looking through that he can determine outright that it was a revolver. But either way, he forces her into the woods. He says that actually her feet were dangling. They weren't even on the ground, that she couldn't get enough, give to kind of move away or break away. He says that she didn't scream, because I think that's everyone's first question. Even if people aren't paying attention and she's kind of off away from everyone, you'd think that she would make enough noise to cause alarm. He said that the way he recounts it is kind of that her hair was pulled too tightly by this man lifting her body weight with her hair, that like it looked like she probably physically couldn't scream. I do think these are a lot of deductions to be making via telescope across the river. But he says that this man forced her into the woods and he waited for a little while. He's later said that he was a little confused. Like he didn't know if these were like older kids, like college kids playing a prank, doing something for drama, being silly. And, I go back and forth on that. I don't think that that's unheard of. You don't ever expect to look out the window or through your telescope and see someone
being assaulted
like this.
Yeah.
So, right. And potentially abducted. Yeah. Like at gunpoint
or abducted.
Her hair. Yeah. So, yeah. So, I don't necessarily put a lot of weight in worrying about whether or not that part was true, but he does go on and continue to watch through the window for a while. And he says later that he said, I just thought, man, it's been 20 or 25 minutes and no one's come back out. It's almost like he got frozen in like kind of a bit of shock there. 20, 25 minutes goes by and he realizes no one's come back out. Like this isn't a joke after all. And he goes on and he calls police. Now, reports will say, as you read about this, that he called 911. He did not call 911. He actually called local, like Indiana State Police or whatever his local department there in Indiana was. Well, keep in mind, this wouldn't be their baby, right? Because she is over in Kentucky. So this gets a little misconstrued. Some people don't care necessarily about the minutia of this. The details are important to me. And so he did call, like I said, his local Indiana police department there to his town in Evansville. There's some reports that they then connected him over to the KSP. You'll hear me say that. That's just Kentucky State Police. They did not. They gave him the phone number for the Kentucky State Police, and he then called them. So here's one of his calls here. We're going to go on and listen to this, and I'll put up a few pictures of Heather.
Before you play that, oh, never mind. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, hang on. No, you're good. You're good. Go for it.
Okay, just real quick. I was just thinking, even if they're if she's
brazen,
so say she's even 30 yards away from somebody.
Yeah.
Right. Wouldn't even, and there were still people.
But she was, I mean,
even how isolated would you think she was
that nobody noticed?
That nobody would have noticed. A woman
she might
being
talk about this.
grabbed by her hair and dragged. You know what I mean? And that's kind of
yeah. It's an answer we don't have.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You know, sorry if I'm overlapping you here a little bit. It's an answer we don't have. And unfortunately, and this we will touch on later, he's the only one we got.
Right.
So for better or for worse, what Tim says is what we've got. So let's go on and play that. And we'll see, but I agree with you. I don't know an answer. He has said a few things like that. He thought that there were maybe 15 or 20 people somewhere in her vicinity. We know that people, up to 50 or 60 people could potentially be there at a time, but we don't. It's like people weren't coming forward to say, oh, I was on that beach at that time. Or if they were, we don't know anything about it. So unfortunately, we don't have the answer.
Sense. All right.
But here's his call. You guys, it's a little grainy at first. This is the best cut audio I have been able to find. It gets a little clearer as he talks. We're just going to play like a minute of it so you can get kind of an idea of his initial suspicion.
And, I mean,
Well, let's try that one more time.
and I got a telescope. I live right on the river. And I was scanning the beach over straight across from the beach from the lock and dam. And there was a girl on the left-hand side of the trees down here, and she was sunbathing, and she was laying face down, and she had her top undone, and she was just bathing. And I was looking back and forth across the beach. I told Karen, and I said, I just listened to her. I said, I just looked at the beach. And about this time, a guy come running out of the trees on the left-hand side, and he ran down and grabbed her by the back of the head of the hair and jerked her up. And she grabbed the towel, and he walked her up into the trees, up in the riverbank over here. And I've been watching now for 25 minutes, and I ain't seen her come back. And all her stuff still set down there on the beach.
Where's she at on the beach, sir?
She was, where the new lock dam is?
The Newburgh locking dam? Yes, sir.
Right straight on that big long beach, and she's almost at the end of the lock wall on your side, on the Kentucky side.
End of the lock wall.
I'm at the end of the lock wall. I'm right straight across.
Police Dispatcher Davis.
Yes, sir. I just called the Indiana State Police. I live in Newburgh, Indiana. And, I mean,
All right. Let's take this picture down. Okay. So if you notice, he said, I just called the Indiana State Police, right? So this is his second call he made, and this is the one to the KSP. The first time when he first, and sorry, you guys, I definitely did not go plug in my computer while that was playing. So the first time though, and I don't have it here for us to listen to, I'll try to grab it. He says that he saw a man walking slowly, like we just talked about, right? This time, if you caught him, he said, I caught a man running up to her. I just feel like those are very different. I don't know whether or not to get in the weeds with that, but he either walked very slowly up to her or he ran up to her. And I feel like if he's making these calls back to back, which he was, I don't know why that's. I don't know. I feel
standing
like that
out for you.
Different.
It's just a piece that's standing out for you, though.
Yeah, it just, and I understand that when someone sees something traumatic or they're kind of shocky or whatever, their story can be inconsistent. So I don't think any of that is worth, hanging your hat on necessarily. But again, like you said, it's just something that stands out, something worth paying attention to, I guess. So there he is talking to the Kentucky State Police, already called the Indiana ones. So he said that the man was approximately 6 feet tall and weighed between 210 and 230 pounds. He said the man had thick brownish hair and a big bushy beard. Tim also said that the man was shirtless and was wearing shorts, and he thought maybe the guy, then he goes back to say, I think maybe he was wearing a wig. And he said that he had a mosquito net wrapped around his head, and this could have been to disguise himself. So authorities quickly kind of began to comb the area. They pretty quickly find her bikini bottom there at the wood line. They said that there was some more evidence that we don't have much knowledge of. So the divers actually came by. They started searching the deeper ends of that nearby water, and authorities went door to door. So about 3 days after she went missing, the search dogs were used to aid in the search. They were able to pick up Heather's scent pretty quickly, but it stopped just inside the wood line. So if you can imagine, this would, kind of lead them to believe that maybe she had been forced into a vehicle at this point and was no longer there on foot or, wrestling around with someone. All right. So now right around that time, a videographer, so about 3 days later after her initial disappearance, a videographer comes forward to authorities. He said that he has footage of her driving in. So this is actually really random and a really kind of neat coincidence because some local farmers had recently had some crops damaged by some of the vehicles that were driving in and out to the beach area. So they all got together and hired a videographer to come kind of catch the culprits, like see who's kind of plowing through their crops and, just not being respectful there. So this videographer is there that day that Heather is there and goes missing. And when he films actually kind of more than he means to. So he actually gets footage unintentionally, of course, of Heather's vehicle coming in exactly kind of as Tim had said, that like around the time that she was there. And then he also starts to kind of get his things together, his gear together to leave. And so he put his video camera on the dash of his car, but he never turned it off. So he winds up capturing a red Ford Bronco headed toward the beach not long after this time. It wasn't long after Heather's car had arrived. So Kentucky State Police released 2 sketches from 2 witnesses. There was, of course, Tim with the telescope. And then there was, we're going to show these. There was another witness that came forward a few days later. This witness actually said that he saw what he thought looked like Heather in the passenger side of a red Chevette. Now, remember, the only vehicle of note earlier per the videographer was that red Bronco, right? So this one says that they see what they thought appeared to be Heather in a red Chevette between 2:30 and 3 o'clock on that day, being held by her hair with her face pushed against a window, the window of the car. So here are the 2 sketches. They look a little bit different. Let's see if they're going to show up for us here. So again, I'll put these photos up, but if you see the one on the left, this guy, this is kind of highly exposed, so it's really bright. It's hard to get that much detail, but he looks a little bit taller, slender, potentially a little bit younger than the sketch on the right. In some other pictures of this, you can see that the sketch on the left has a bit of a more defined narrow nose, a bit of a leaner face. The sketch on the right is not nearly as bushy hair, a bit of a rounder face, and kind of a different looking nose altogether as well. Do you guys have any input on that?
I mean, there are some slight differences, but there's still a lot alike. I mean, it's a full head of hair and a beard.
In my kind of similarly, I see the differences, but if you're trying to recall something, isn't that like one of the biggest things?
Right.
Yeah.
And you know,
that's kind of one of the things, right? Is it's like the recall. People's recall could be off, right? I don't know a lot about criminology and stuff like that, other than kind of what friends or you've shared with us.
For sure. And you have two different witnesses. So for two different people independently, those could be deemed very similar. I do think that you would either say that he had bushier hair or not, maybe, because that was kind of a big difference, because that's an easy one to catch. But, you know, I recently interviewed Matt Klein, who is an amazing forensic composite artist. And he had a lot of insight, well, obviously, but things that I wouldn't have even thought to ask or know about sketch artistry. And he talked about, you know, the questions, like they let people come in with what they have to say. They may just have word vomit right when they sit down. They look like this. They have this color eyes. Their eyebrows were like this, right? Their nose was like this. Or they also have questions that they'll ask witnesses
to elicit,
to get much more specific, you know, characterization, features, things like that. So those are the two initial sketches that we have. So KSP releases those two sketches and people start calling in, as you can imagine. So many people started calling in, specifically though, about a man that resembled the sketch, particularly on the left, named Marty Ray Dill. What do we say about people with three names? No,
they're serial killers, isn't that the answer? I think. It's not true? Oh, I thought that was the response.
That is what we say, but it's not.
Okay. Probably.
So police start to really put effort into this, to the idea of Marty. All right. So 2 years prior, Marty had been arrested after harassing a woman. Then in Evansville, Indiana, Marty had been seen driving around attempting to solicit minors for sex and had complaints there. Interesting. Marty drives a red Ford Bronco. Okay. Police eventually pull Marty over for a routine traffic stop. They are able to kind of search the Bronco initially, a little bit, find a strand of hair that looks like it could be Heather's. That's obviously very subjective to say, but at the time, that's how they described it. Guns, 2 knives, a roll of duct tape, rubber gloves, and rope.
Sounds like a kidnapper's car.
It does, indeed. The inside of the tailgate had a little bit of bloodstains on it that we don't know of any testing or forensics done on that at the time. This was 1995. You know, guys, we always have to keep that in mind when we're talking about forensics and trying to get into DNA work and these kinds of things. But in 95, I mean, this wasn't the Stone Ages there. So, you know, there were some things there. There was technology for sure. Obviously, we know it's advanced exponentially since then, but there was technology at the time. So they find all these things. Now, also keep in mind, though, Marty was a roofer and contractor, these kind of like construction. So I'm not saying that we can explain away the things in the car necessarily, but, you know, when you tell something in a certain light, if I just say he had these gloves and rope and this girl's missing and you know what I mean? It paints a picture that, this guy. But
it makes
also
it
keep in mind.
Yeah.
Right.
I have every one of those things in my garage too. So
garage, not car.
They're just not all in my
car.
That's not in your car. Right. That's the big piece.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's exactly right. All of those points. So he does have that. We do know that that's his occupation. So take it or leave it, but that's just the information that we have. So when talking to Marty's wife, Tracy, she stated that Marty normally keeps his hair shorter than what it was shown in the sketches. All right. Tracy tells them that Marty told her if they come around the house, he was going to kill himself. So Tracy started talking to a man named William, who was Marty's attorney, I guess, in the past for all of his other indiscretions. And William knew that Marty's, let's say, like mental stability was not super sharp. It wasn't where it probably could be. He knew Marty to probably be a bit of someone who could self-harm. And so he urges authorities to, like, essentially don't bust in at night, like knock on it. Let me go to the door first and talk to him. I'll get him out for you. He was concerned that if they just kind of busted in, Marty might end things like he had threatened to do. Mm-hmm. The lawyer actually goes on to say, hey, look, I know where his Bronco is. It's behind some brush. on his property, you know, call it hidden or not. It's but it's put back away, tucked back away in a way that it normally was not. But his lawyer was like, look, I'll show you where the car is, you know, help me help you kind of thing. And I'll help you get Marty out and you can talk to him. So these are the conversations that Tracy, Marty's wife, is having with authorities at this time. So in the middle of the night on September 1st, 1995, the police actually do go to Marty's house with a warrant. They were not there long. Now, this is where it gets a little interesting. So there are accounts that I found nowhere else until I listened over and over to interviews with Heather's mother. So until I heard this, I had not read it anywhere, found this information anywhere else.
Okay.
As per the way she talks, which she has worked, we'll talk more about her later. But like I said before, it's been almost 3 decades. She has worked with the FBI. She has worked tirelessly. We hear this a lot in these kinds of cases from spouses or parents from these unsolved cases like this, that they amass their own files and filing cabinets over the years of every little detail. So what she has, she does not seem to be one that speaks off of subjective information or just like her gut feeling. She's talking on reports and records that she has, that she's used, you know, the FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, to obtain, even though they're redacted. So she's, you know, she's trying to shoot straight from the hip, I think, and give you actual, you know, details that are real. She says that there was a friend who came to the door as well. Like there was a friend around at the same time as they were about to execute the search warrant. And the friend was like, let me go in. Let me just go in and like get him. Like, trust me, it'll be kind of safer, better, whatever. Just like, kind of like his attorney had said. This guy goes in, and per mother's report, this guy goes in, at the time they hear a single gunshot, and this guy runs out and says, you know, screaming, Marty's dead. He killed himself. He killed himself. Now, outside of what she said, everything else I read says that they kicked the door down. It's the middle of the night. This sounds maybe more reasonable, but they go in and same thing. They had not been there long. They hear a single gunshot and he's dead. Either way, the story goes that Marty has committed suicide. Okay. As soon as they come to his house to talk to him in relation to Heather Teague's abduction. So, let's see where we are. So they go, the FBI gets brought in pretty quickly at this point, and the Bronco is turned over to them. They're hoping to extract more DNA, more evidence, and hoping the FBI can kind of assist them in these efforts. So they use cadaver dogs at this point to search his property. He has about 28 acres. I got a picture here. He's got a trailer that sits on about 28 acres. And they use the cadaver dogs to search that property there. They find nothing. But this is where it gets even stranger. Marty's actually bald.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
So when you look at this, let me show you this picture. This is a picture of Marty from, okay, right? You remember those sketches we just saw?
Yeah.
This is a picture of Marty from one of his indictments prior. Okay, earlier on.
Is that a wig? Because remember, like, you wouldn't have
I know, right?
A police photo with a wig, right?
I don't believe
That's
it's a
big
wig.
head of hair.
And
I don't think so either.
Yeah, it's a big head of hair. For you that are listening, we the sketch shows, either sketch you want to look at shows a man with the bushy head of hair and the beard. And this sketch looks pretty great when you put them side by side there. But Marty now, current day, so the police actually released a photo of his driver's license at that time, okay, to the public. Pretty much right off the rip, this guy was their guy. Okay, so, and they tell Heather's mother as much. He is named suspect numero uno right off the rip, right after the sketch artist had what they had, and he drives a Bronco, and he had some former, crimes against women. They go to his house, he kills himself, makes it even easier, I think, for them to say he was the suspect. And here we are. Keep that in mind, because with that information, now are we following up. Like, you know what I mean? And we talk about confirmation bias all the time. Like, you can't look at someone and make them the one who perpetrated this crime. So then, because when you do that, you start doing everything you can to make the pieces fit to where that's your guy, your guy, right? And you can make it happen, just like we talked about the stuff in his car. Now, was he using those to rape and abduct women? Maybe. Or maybe that was his work supplies, but I could tell it to you in a couple of different ways to color your vision, to color your thoughts on it, just like documentaries do it all the time. So just because he drives this Bronco, and just because he has these past crimes, and just because he committed suicide, I get it, but that doesn't mean you've not proven your case. You've not proven that this guy abducted this girl. Okay.
Right.
So
real quick question for you.
Please.
So she's abducted on August 26th. How long was it? What's the timeline from then until he shoots him? Or
9/1.
9/1.
That was September 1st.
5 days. 5 days, 6 days, something like that. Okay.
Did they happen to say when he shaved his head? Like, was it recent?
So that's where it gets. I'm trying to read through these comments. Hey, everybody. That's right. Abby just said, I was going to say Matt Klein would know. Again, if you're listening, if you're new here, we do this show live every week. So occasionally I'll try to answer a question or two or kind of engage the chats when it comes to specifics in the case. So that's, to me, this was one of the more like kind of bombshell pieces of information when you asked that, Beth, about his hair. Because I had read and read and read and listened and listened and listened constantly, like I do before shows, to like kind of get a beat on this guy and try to understand this. And I don't have his driver's license picture, but when they released his driver's license to the public, the picture of him, and then you have this sketch, it is as though you were looking at the same picture. So I will tell you that Heather's mother has gone back to say, in her opinion, she thinks that the sketch was drawn from the license. Oh. Now, she is definitely in the camp. I mean, to be perfectly fair, she is in the camp that not only were some balls dropped, but maybe some things were glossed over or covered up. I think that she would, I think I wouldn't be remiss to say that that's kind of how she feels.
Right.
So she has definitely, once you kind of plant a seed, that's where she's growing. But she does think that the sketch was too similar to his driver's license picture that because his driver's license was almost a decade old. He hasn't had hair like that in months and months and months. He, at the time of Heather's abduction, actually had a beard that was cut so short it was almost stubble, and he was almost bald. Like, he had shaved his head.
Okay.
So he didn't look anything like the driver's license picture that they released, which at this point, the man is dead. They've seen him. So I do think it's interesting that that's the picture they put out. And, unless they want the public to feel comfortable in their assessment of, like they have the sketch, they got his license, they got the guy, they got the Bronco, wham, bam, boom. I don't know. I can't speak to why they released that photo, but why release that photo if he looks nothing like that?
I mean, it makes it easier for them to justify, we got the guy, because it's a win in their books, whether it's a real win or not, and so then you have to think from the family's perspective, they're not quite so ready to take that, especially knowing some of the things that they knew. And she's like, no, we didn't get the guy. Our guy's still out there,
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah.
You don't mean to do it, but law enforcement wants the W, right? So everything lined up.
Well, I do think that generally they want the right W, you know what I'm saying? But this one gets hairy. No pun intended.
All right.
Over my head.
Good one.
This one gets a little stranger. So that's that. Marty's done. Like we said, that was a few days after, 5 or 6 days after she went missing. Let's see, here we are. Where are we? So the driver's license photo, like I said, was about a decade old. We have other accounts that say that, like, Marty had friends and relatives that often borrowed his Bronco. Okay. There are things that we just don't always think about, right? So they actually, a lot of his friends and relatives did corroborate that other people would borrow his vehicle. we learn that actually the casing found at Marty's house, like in relation to the gunshot wound, could not be, they never could actually verify that it could belong to the gun that was found beside him, that was believed to be the gun that he committed suicide with.
Okay.
It just gets a little interesting here. So now we have a little weirdness with the autopsy we'll talk about. There's some questions there, like kind of going back about the autopsy, that now there's a little bit of discrepancy there in saying that actually the angle of the gunshot wound was not necessarily consistent with suicide. That didn't necessarily look like that's what that would have been. There were reports that he had brain matter everywhere, that it was, open. I don't know where that came from. I'm not saying that all of these reports were straight up from the police, but then you hear that actually there was no exit wound. There's just a lot of weirdness when it comes to this guy's. It sounds kind of open and shut that he killed himself and it's done, but then it has just gotten weirder as the time has gone on. Mm-hmm. So we're going to move on, but that was 1995. So in 2004, nearly a decade later, almost as old as his driver's license, the KSP received a new tip at this point. So an investigator in Ohio actually reached out. This guy has been keeping an eye on this other guy, this guy named Chris Below, and it's spelled like the word below, Bellow. So Chris Below, who, say it with me, happened to be a truck driver. Okay.
Oh.
Since the year 2000. So this investigator had been keeping an eye on him for about 4 or 5 years himself, but Chris has actually been on the radar of law enforcement since 1991, when a woman named Betzer was murdered in Medina, Ohio. Chris was from the same county that Heather disappeared from, Henderson County, Kentucky. Let's talk a little bit about Chris. And let me also show you a picture of Chris. All right. So here is Chris Below. Okay.
Long hair, kind of similar, narrow nose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Potentially.
He looks like the left picture, right?
The left picture, right?
That we saw.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Not the big bushy beard, but
right.
That's easy to trim.
Well, in that one picture, right? Exactly.
Yeah. In that, yeah.
So, like, my beard looks a lot better now than it did a couple of days ago.
I mean,
so it's just really dependent on the day of the
self-care
week.
is important.
Yeah.
Self-care is very important.
Mm-hmm.
So, Chris actually pled guilty eventually to, I told you that he had been looked at in this woman, Catherine Betzer's abduction. Her body was not found, but he eventually pled guilty to shooting her in his apartment. He said that he disposed of her body or her remains in a trash bin. But since they never found her body, he was charged with attempted involuntary manslaughter. What? He was sentenced to
get him behind bars.
Involuntary manslaughter.
Yeah, right.
Let's get him locked up.
Attempted involuntary. He was sentenced to 11 to 18 years. He is also suspected to be responsible for 3 other women: Mary Cousteau, Shailene Farrell, and Christina Porco. Look, y'all, I've read about the Heather Teague case before, never in such detail as in preparation for this show, but I was actually starting to research Christina Porco when I came back upon the Heather Teague case and didn't understand or realize at the time that there may not be, but also potentially could be, some sort of a connection. I'm going to show you a picture of these 3 women that I just named that at 4. Are we not showing it? Come on now.
There you go.
Come on.
There you go.
So I'm going to show you them,
similar.
and then we're going to go back to a picture of Heather. All 3 of these women, listeners, have dark hair, bangs, similar appearance to the face. What you can't tell from these pictures is they're all very similar in stature. They're all petite. They're thin, they're short. small women. There they are, and I'll show you another picture. Here's a picture of Heather again.
Okay.
Okay.
They all have very similar characteristics.
Yep.
Very, very similar. Same age range, you know. So we're kind of looking at a
Hairstyle,
lot.
like, yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. All right. So those three women, this Chris is kind of being looked at for, but he's currently, like I said, in prison for the manslaughter of this other woman that he admitted to murdering. They just never found her body. So Chris was actually logged. Remember, he was a trucker. I think that needs to be a sound, maybe like on my show, like a little clip that says he was a truck driver. And to all of you that are truck drivers, thank you for listening to my podcast while you're driving. So Chris,
See something,
was logged,
say something.
see something, say something, please, guys. Chris was logged to be near Newburgh Beach when Heather vanished. So he was supposed to have been where she was when she went missing. He actually left town the day that Marty died. Which could be just a coincidence.
Maybe he had a job. Big job. Had to
maybe he did. Also, you know, so we're going to start to get into the I don't like to speculate a whole lot, but some ideas and theories behind this. There are people in the camp that definitely, it was Chris below, that definitely, now Heather's mother is in this camp. She really thinks that he is the one that has something to do with it. She thinks, she'll say that she's not sure that Marty didn't have anything to do with it, but she thinks that Marty was actually framed. She believes that Chris was 100% on the hook for this one. There are people who have, you know, looked into this and researched it and really think that the two work together. So maybe Marty was bald. Maybe he did have a shaved beard at this time. Maybe he was the getaway driver, right? Maybe Chris is the one they saw that Tim saw on the beach and Marty drove that car away. There were some other strange accounts of like them seeing, like them meaning a couple witnesses that thought that they saw a woman in the back of a vehicle with like essentially struggling with a man, but someone else was driving. So people who hear that definitely think that maybe Marty was driving the vehicle, Chris gets her in the back of the car, and whatever happens, happens.
Is there any examples of them knowing each other, being in the same area, or friends, or anything like that?
Fantastic question. So they, as far as we all know, the two of them were not necessarily acquaintances, but they swam in the same circles. So they have mutual friends.
Okay.
There's also some drug stuff talked about. Remember also Heather had gotten into some drugs.
It's like one of the first notes I took. Yeah. It's like, what kind of drugs? Is it just weed or is it something different?
Well, to speculate, I would say no, because usually if it's weed, they're not going to say they got on drugs. Now they're acting erratically. And now,
that's what I was thinking initially. Yeah. Something different.
Here's where it also gets super weird. And this is not a rabbit hole I spent a lot of time going into. I can promise you we will have a follow-up. We will do another one. If you guys want to come on for it, it won't be next week. I've got something else lined up next week.
Got some research to do anyway. Yeah.
Want to come back? We can dive into this in a different way, kind of remove the Heather piece for a minute and kind of look at some of these other things. But we have a man, and you guys may be familiar with the name James Hendricks. So James was a lead guy in the FBI at the time. The FBI evidently tried to tell Sarah, Heather's mother, that James Hendricks was, I guess you start to find out that he starts to have, and you can Google it and you can look this stuff up in terms of like his actual office, like these reports from like news agencies and stuff. Like he was actually accused by a lot of women he worked at, women he worked with, for making advances and things like that. So it starts kind of innocently enough like that. So he kind of gets jammed up in his job over those allegations. But then you kind of start to go down another hole where it looks like he had gotten into, maybe there was some drug stuff going on, maybe some pornography stuff that was like, I don't mean just necessarily he was viewing it. I'm not sure if he had to do with people who were partaking in it. It gets a little fuzzy, so I don't want to speak on it too much. I don't want to speak on it, but it sounds like it became quite the scandal. A lot of people have heard his name for that reason, because a lot of this was in the news. There are reports that he had met with Heather the night before she went missing. Now, he has separate allegations, like I said, that involve like sexual misconduct and drug charges in some kind of way. There was a woman named Samantha, I believe, who worked for the FBI. She had worked Heather's case. Remember, the FBI was brought in pretty early on. This is where Heather's mother starts crying when she starts talking about this FBI agent, Samantha. And she starts trying to call her. And she says, hey, I've been trying to call you. And she said, I know, like, here's my other number. Call me on this one or whatever. However, she was trying to get in contact with Heather's mother. She wasn't reaching her initially. She finally gets in touch with her. And when she does, she says, I won't be working for the FBI much longer. She said, but you need to know about your daughter. And she corroborates this idea that Michael had met up with Heather the night before. And they keep talking about a public boat ramp. That's something that evidently did not exist in that portion of Newburgh Beach where Heather had gone sunbathing. So this would have had to have been a different body of water or location entirely. They had some kind of a meetup. So we'll keep it gray because I don't know the details on it.
Okay.
I'm not sure, honestly, that anyone does. In fact, some people say they never did meet up, but evidently it sounds like some people think they did, including this one FBI agent. So she said something along the lines of, which sounds cryptic, and I don't like this stuff if it didn't really happen or wasn't really said, but I guess Heather's mother says that this FBI agent says something along the lines of Heather was hired to the Democratic Party, but like wouldn't speak in details. To me, it's coming off like I don't think she got a position through HR to work for the Democratic Party as such. It sounds like this is Samantha's way of saying there's some dealings with this Michael Hendricks guy. Or you listen to her. And so it says that like I think he got into like there was some prostitution stuff going on. Again, I'm not so they make it sound like he was facilitating these things, not just like partaking in things. He has gotten hemmed up. So his company where he was a separate company that he was also involved with is that, how do you pronounce it? NVIDIA, or not the other, that one that's like the NV, all the letters that's like a conspiracy theory.
Oh, Nick, it's
I'm
trying to think of it. I know what you're saying.
Yeah. So
we'll get somebody in the comments.
In the news recently about like a lot of weird like sex stuff.
The Nexium or whatever, something like that, right?
So he was somehow affiliated there as well. It just gets super weird. And sure enough, this woman that had been the FBI agent, what she thought did come to fruition. She was fired very quickly. This conversation with Heather's mother. This is where Heather's mother starts to cry because she says, I don't know if this is what caused the downfall or not, but I guess she became an alcoholic. Like, kind of yucky things befell this former FBI agent after this all came out. With this information, this is part of what leads Heather's mother to think that the Marty Ray Dill was, a cover-up that he was not implicated for this crime at all or should not have been. I want to cover more of the 3 girls that are missing that Chris below is looked at for. And then I want to get more into the Michael Hendricks stuff. I'm kind of interested in that. So if we do a part 2, I think that's
a rabbit hole into itself, right? Absolutely.
So what do you guys think? What's your initial thought on Heather?
I have a question.
And keep in mind, her body has never been found.
That was one question. So they never found her anywhere.
They
my
did
second
not,
one was, if Marty wasn't guilty, then why commit suicide? Is it because he had already had so many problems? I mean, obviously mentally unstable at this point, right? And it doesn't, things don't always make sense for the reactions that they have. But why commit suicide if you didn't do it? Then why would the cops let this friend go in? That seems like totally out of protocol.
If he's got a gun, right?
You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, you go in. He could have gotten shot. You know what I'm saying? Like, it just seems kinky to me.
I agree. There's a lot of weirdness with it gets a little hairy. It really kind of does. I agree with you there. I do think that the committing suicide portion, I think only because it's so obvious, like it feels like, well, he wouldn't kill himself if he hadn't been complicit in this somehow.
Yes.
And let's go down the vein that he did kill himself, that this wasn't some weird conspiracy. No one did this to him. He was not murdered. He committed suicide. Okay. If he did, some people will say, well, he already had so many charges. He didn't want to go back. If they come in to search, then he doesn't want to go back to prison. Maybe not. I don't know. It could be unrelated. Maybe he's done something else. Maybe he's killed somebody else. I don't, it could be unrelated. I think crazier things have happened. Stranger coincidences have happened. Or maybe he knew a little too much, or maybe a buddy of his did borrow his truck and he knew what happened, or maybe he was somehow a part of it.
Right.
Complicit in some way. Now, I will say that it's been said that there were whispers of hog farms and things like that. If you're not familiar, a hog will eat anything, but let's say a human being, let's say some remains, a corpse, through the bone. I mean,
all of it,
fairly quickly too, right?
It's gone. So I don't know. One thing I can't find, I've kind of tried to look for, but these are not searches that are really readily available, but like their access to any hog farms, but who knows? I mean, that could be where they know that hogs are in a pen on the corner of this highway and that highway, who's to say, but, that's kind of another little camp. And I agree with you. I mean, it definitely speaks. I mean, it definitely presents a case that he has this car. He had at one point the look, but he didn't when it happened, which is weird. Right. And that he committed suicide and he had those weird things in his car. So if you put all those together, that does look interesting, but there are too many other things that we can't call him out.
It's almost too coincidental that all these things lined up. You know what I'm saying? Like,
there's that
you might not have, criminals aren't the smartest people in the world, but one would think that you're like, okay, I did this. I need to get this crap out of my car, especially because I have a history of doing this crap.
Sure.
I should probably.
Yeah. And we know, because we've seen enough, especially like serial killers, we've seen enough where they do find it's horrible, but it's the joke, right? Like the serial killer starter kit or whatever, and it's all the zip ties and a knife, and
right.
So maybe he just didn't. Maybe it was for work. Maybe he wasn't the one driving the Bronco that day. We know that a Bronco that resembles his with like the chrome bars on top, like it kind of down to some detail, and that's one thing that was not verified by old Telescope Tim back there across the river. This was from the actual videographer, so there is footage of that
of car exiting, right?
Yeah, and that's what I don't like. My problem with this case to start with is the Tim portion, only because witnesses are fallible, and if you only have one, you can't treat everything they say as gold. There's got to be some fluidity there. It's not black and white every single thing they say, and I think that was Heather's mother's problem to start with, was that she was like, everything Tim said, they just went with it. Oh, they even said that about the wig and whatnot, when he got so far as to say all that stuff. Now, Marty, okay, keep in mind, Tim could have gotten height and weight wrong. In fact, I would expect him to not be on the money there, but he said the guy was tall, a little over 6 feet tall, between 210 and 230, which again, guys, I feel like he's given some incredible detail.
I was wondering how he would know that.
How would you know that? You don't have other men standing there next to him. You don't have like anything to compare and contrast his size to. But just to keep of note, Marty was like 5'8", and nowhere near 200 pounds.
Yeah.
So
that's a huge difference.
That's a very big
if he's
difference.
Like my size, 180 versus a 230 pound dude. I'm 5'7",
right?
And versus a 6, it's notably different. You know what I mean?
Right.
So absolutely,
I think that's interesting to know as well. Now, I don't think Marty was a good guy. In fact, I think Marty was a pretty terrible guy based off of a lot of his past charges. Yeah. But that doesn't mean, and we talk about this all the time, that doesn't mean he did this. Now, his wife still lived in the home for a while. It does get, so Heather's mother kind of contacted Tracy, Marty's wife, so much. And she's like, yeah, I did harass her, but I wanted these answers because I've heard too many other things. I've heard that Marty said this. I've heard that XYZ was there before. Marty couldn't have even been there because we have Marty having an alibi that nobody talks about. She's like, I want the answers to this, and no one seems to be able to provide them to me. So she did contact Tracy, to where Tracy then took Heather's mother to court on harassment and whatnot. And that kind of came and went. It's, whatever. But I will say I'll go on and put up the number myself on Instagram. It's if you have any information or know of anybody who was anywhere near that area at the time, again, that was August of 95 in Henderson County, Kentucky, you can call the KSP at 270-826-3312. Or you can actually call Heather's mom, Sarah Teague, at 270-824-8343. She wants her number out there. She wants her daughter's memory alive. She wants, of course, to just find her and know what in the world happened.
Absolutely. Either way, just find her.
That's
right. Now, this is a really interesting Unsolved. There's so many directions that this could go.
It's hard to do in one show.
Absolutely. And I mean, we've been on for an hour, and it's like, how do you directionally go on this?
Yeah. Well, there's so many avenues, because you could start to, there's even crazier ones that you could do, like from the conspiracy theory concept, like if she was doing something with the Democrats,
plants,
was this guy really a friend, or you know what it's like? There's just so many things that you could be like, who was this guy? How well do you know Marty? So there's
and when
a lot of different ways you could go down a deeper dive on too. It's like the cops either did it or shot. They were in there when he shot himself, or he shot himself when his friend was in there.
Yeah, it's
or
crazy.
The other side is.
Actually, I'm gonna look this up while you're talking.
Did he get shot by a police officer? And they said, well, he shot him because there's the evidence that the casing didn't match.
Well, the angle and the casing
right. So there's that
contradicting stories of his injuries. Yeah,
done
it's
these
just, there's a lot of
forensics.
inconsistencies, I think, which probably makes this really frustrating for her mom and anyone working to try to solve it.
Yeah, this one's a twister, if you will. Right.
It is, and I will tell you that I just sorry, I was trying to look up the location between the distance between two locations. Okay, it's about 2 hours. I covered the Crystal Rogers case, and it's also called the Bardstown murders. So Bardstown, Kentucky, and Henderson County evidently are like 2 hours away. So it's going to be a totally different jurisdiction, but I was a little curious about that. It is, I will say again that my radar peaked when I learned that Marty was bald at the time, and that information about that James Hendricks, the possibility these could be whispers that are completely unfounded. And so that's why I'm not exploring it tonight, because I can't without proper detail. But I want to look into the James Hendricks potential association, because if that's the case, now we're in a whole different ball game.
Yep.
But then we've got the crispy low piece. That's the next piece that I think needs to be dug through, right? Because I mean, there's been what is it? Is it the Houston or Galveston corridor murders or something like that? They did a Netflix special on it where it was a truck driver that was like driving up and down and just murdering people, something to that effect, right? Yeah. And because it's just opportunity, right? And it sounds very similar. I'm not saying it's exactly the same.
Well, and he had the same taste in women for the other three. So she works, she fits in that category too. So
it's just interesting.
He was in the area. Yeah. There's so many different avenues with this case. I think you have your hands full.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's great. Make you think. Yeah, for sure.
It does. Well, you guys, look, y'all are awesome. Listen, you guys go and follow Beth and Greg on Instagram, and you can find them at The Bar is Open with Beth and Greg. And Greg is Greg. I always joke about your last name. It's not Lamontagna, but that's how I like to say it. And Beth's
how my mom said it.
Llama Mama, right?
Yep, La Mama.
Yeah.
La Mama. I always put a llama in my head. Sorry. Like I know what it is on Instagram, but in my head. But go follow them, guys. They've got a great show over there. They talk about all kinds of things. They have a whole separate one called the Castro Files. They go down. You want conspiracy theory? Listen to that. A lot of fun stuff. So they've got great content, and they're a lot of fun to listen to. You guys, I really appreciate you coming on.
This was fun. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this is awesome. Great. We definitely need to do part 2 on this, and we'll help you out on the research for sure.
Oh my.
Yes.
Oh my. Maybe part
we're
2,
here.
part
There's
3.
no
we'll
rush.
See. This one could, we might find ourselves having an ongoing little series with this one. That sounds great. Yeah. You guys hang around in the background or in the back, the waiting room, whatever they call this mess, and I'll be right there. But all right, guys. So thank you all for tuning in tonight. We will be back next week. I think Jay Keefe from One More and I'm Out of Here podcast is going to be my co-host next week. So we will be bringing something kind of fun there. Thanks for all your support and for listening and helping to grow the show since we're on a new channel here. And go grab you a t-shirt and do all the things that I'm supposed to ask you to do. I don't know, but hope you guys have a great night, and we'll see y'all next Tuesday at some point.